Hello, my name is Jorge Escobar, and today I will be giving my final presentation on my home country of El Salvador. I will begin with a brief overview of the country, then delve into three main points which I think have and will continue to influence the country itself, as well as the people of El Salvador. These topics are the influence of religion on politics, the influence of the United States, and the political turmoil particularly pushed forward by corruption. And finally, I will conclude with my own personal thoughts and final reflections on the current status and future of El Salvador. El Salvador, nicknamed El Pulgarcito de América, is the smallest country in Latin America. I was born there and almost all of my family still lives in the country. El Salvador is extremely diverse within its small area. You could be on a warm beach in the morning having an ice cold drink with a hot chocolate with a sweater on in the afternoon. It has a lot of gorgeous wildlife and natural ecotourism, but unfortunately, it is not viewed as a huge tourist destination due to the insecurity that the country faces. But honestly, I've taken friends there, and they've realized that not the whole country is plagued by maras or lack of safety. Here are some statistics and facts about El Salvador. The capital city is San Salvador. The official language is Spanish. The population is 6.38 million people, within a surface area of only 21,000 square kilometers, which makes it approximately the size of the state of Massachusetts. It has a tropical climate which is moderated by altitudes, meaning depending on the height you are at, the temperature may vary. It has mountains, volcanoes, rivers, and beaches. And as far as ethnic composition, it's 86.3% mestizo, 12.7% white, and 1% other. This is due to the intermarriage of Spanish settlers with the indigenous population of the region, which resulted in a largely ethnically homogeneous people, with almost 9/10 identifying as mestizos. And now for a basic history of El Salvador. Pre-colonial times were a mix of both Aztec and Mayan influence, and there are still a few cities named by these groups, such as Sonsonate or Ahuachapan. In 1524, the Spanish arrived from Guatemala, and even though the indigenous fought back, by 1525 the Spanish town of San Salvador had been founded. However, the Pipil managed to kick the Spanish out multiple times, but the Spanish ultimately returned permanently in 1528. During the colonial period, El Salvador was heavily used for agriculture, but in 1811 a priest named José Matías Delgado incited the first revolutionary movements. The people continued to revolt and officially became independent in 1821, along with the other Central American countries. Officially, El Salvador became a sovereign country in 1841. El Salvador quickly became a coffee republic, and this created great inequality from its inception. The indigenous attempted to fight back against a rising elite, but were ultimately kept down. El Salvador was plagued with military dictatorships and coups, which created a very strong distinction between the elite, who associated with the right, and the poor and indigenous, who adopted communist leftist ideals. In 1980, the country began its civil war, which would last over a decade. This war destroyed El Salvador and permanently separated the country. It was a war that brought in religious ideals, American influence, and extreme political separation. In 1992, the peace accords were officially signed, but the aftermath of the war is still in effect today. Since then, the right, Arena, Alianza Republicana Nacionalista, and the left, FMLN, Frente Farabundo Martí para la Liberación Nacional, have been continuing their battle on a political front. Sadly, as the country began to recover from the Civil War, it was devastated by Hurricane Mitch in 1998, which caused rivers to overflow and extreme landslides around the country, and by a major 7.6 earthquake in 2001, which destroyed homes, including my own. I firmly believe that the Civil War has forever changed the course of Salvadoran history, and because of that, I believe that it is worth being the main focus of my research. To begin, I would like to outline the influence of religion on the country, specifically the Civil War. El Salvador has historically been a predominantly Catholic society. Currently, about 4/5 of the population profess the Catholic religion. During the post-Vatican II era, the Catholic Church in Latin America adopted so-called liberation theology, which basically said that the Church had a responsibility to help the poor at all costs and take action. Unfortunately, in many countries, including El Salvador, this turned extremely Marxist and meant physical violence. Father Oscar Arnulfo Romero was a Salvadorian priest who was named Archbishop of San Salvador in 1977 because the government believed that he was very conservative and would not support the liberation theology in its full form. Later that year, however, a friend of his, Jesuit priest Rutilio Grande, was killed by the military for his involvement as an activist of liberation theology directly against the government. This movement had a profound impact on Romero. He stated, "When I looked at Rutilio lying there dead, I thought, if they have killed him for doing what he did, then I too have to walk the same path." From this moment on, Romero became extremely involved in liberation theology movements. He allied himself with the guerrilla left, which wanted to overthrow the government. He used his homilies and writings as a call to action to fight back against what he viewed as an oppressive government, and even suggested that the people see the guerrilla as fighters for good. On March 24th of the year 1984, the now saint and martyr of the church, Father Oscar Arnulfo Romero, was killed while giving Mass. Although the details still remain foggy to this day, many believe that he was killed by the right party in El Salvador. Romero, which has actually just recently been canonized, even though some people think it should have been done a while back, and some believe that it should have never happened. The issues with canonizing him came because of his involvement in Salvadorian politics. Romero was and continues to be an image of anti-right politics in El Salvador, to the point that when the leftist guerrilla took power a few years ago, they renamed the major highway and the airport after Romero. Romero brought together his religion and liberation theological views with the politics of El Salvador. Even in death, he still serves as the face of the Salvadorian left. Because of his canonization and involvement with the left, I personally know people who have left the Catholic Church. They told me that they could not be a part of a church that believes that Romero, who allied himself with the murderous guerrilla, is a saint. Personally, as a Catholic and as a Salvadorian, I feel conflicted. I do believe that the Catholic Church canonized him and therefore should accept him fully as a saint. But as someone whose grandfather was murdered by the guerrilla for simply being at the wrong place at the wrong time, I find it difficult to accept that a man who supported this group is a saint. The country was first divided by civil war. Then it was divided by the political parties that came out of that. And now, once again, it's being torn apart by a simple decision of the Catholic Church. Moving on to the influence of the United States. Until the Civil War, El Salvador was of little interest to the United States and the world. Throughout his presidency, Ronald Reagan made it a point to stop communism at all costs, and he claimed that by intervening in El Salvador and drawing a line in the sand, he would send a message to all communist leaders of the world. Many people believe that Reagan's El Salvador was the equivalent to Nixon's Vietnam. The reason I find this most interesting can be summarized by a quote found in a news article speaking of the intervention. Many Americans would prefer to forget that chapter in American history. Those under the age of 40 may not even be aware of it. Salvadorians haven't forgotten, however. My uncle was actually sent by the U.S. to the Salvadorian Civil War. He told me that they were sent in to train and provide aid to the military. They taught a lot about guerrilla-style warfare, which they had learned in Vietnam. He says that many of them stayed for extended periods of time and actually fought alongside the Salvadorian military directly against the leftist guerrilla groups. My dad, who served in the Salvadorian Air Force during this time, remembers receiving classes, old guns, old planes from the United States troops. Realistically, I believe that without the U.S. intervention, the left guerrilla forces probably would have triumphed over the military. U.S. intervention definitely changed the course of Salvadorian history. Many people blame the deaths in El Salvador on the United States. I do think that they did play a part by supporting the right, But they are not the only ones to blame, because both sides committed atrocities. I think that although it may not be the case in all Latin American countries, the US intervention in El Salvador helped because it allowed for the civil war in El Salvador to end faster due to the sheer fact that it ended up being a guerrilla left versus a military right supported by the United States. The peace accords only happened because both sides reached a point where it was a back and forth with no side gaining a clear advantage. The peace accords formally established democracy in El Salvador and prohibited military and government power. That only happened because the United States supported the right. However, moving forward from the Civil War, the United States continued to maintain a relationship with El Salvador. In 2001, El Salvador changed its national currency from the colón to the US dollar because it was supposed to help boost the economy. And even though during the last year there may have been some tension between the two countries, overall, the US has maintained a very good relationship with Salvadoran governments, both from the left and from the right. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is about the political turmoil particularly pushed forward by corruption. Political turmoil particularly began where history of El Salvador changed, the Civil War. The extreme opposition between the left and right made its way from the battlegrounds to the political sphere. It's not a secret that corruption is common in Latin American politics. El Salvador has been no exception to this, with corruption and stealing coming from both sides of the political spectrum. The most recent is actually one of the largest corruption scandals El Salvador has ever seen. Ex-President Mauricio Funes had already been accused of taking bribes from gangs and other groups in the past. But this year, the new set of accusations are for embezzlement of government funds for around $351 million, and has become an international issue because he has fled the country to Nicaragua. This is a huge amount of money which was taken both in cash and used on diverse trips around the globe. What makes the situation even worse, in my opinion, is the fact that Funes and his political party, FMLN, criticized ex-President Tony Saca, who is now in prison for stealing $301 million. In addition, the FMLN is a political party which evolved from the guerrilla during the Civil War, who claimed to stand for the poor and pushed for equality. But Funes stole from all the people of El Salvador to make himself richer. Sadly, El Salvador has suffered from various presidencies and has proven true to the saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Mauricio Funes is just the most recent case in El Salvador's history. He stole so much from the people, and I'm saddened to say that I doubt it will be the last case El Salvador will face. Although it saddens me to see that my country has gone through this even now when my family still lives there, just like Dr. Rosende said, I'm glad that this is in the news because it means that the people of El Salvador are taking a stand against corruption on both sides of the political spectrum.